So as you know, I was on break for about a month. We didn't do we didn't do much, but it was nice to just hang out in a relaxed setting with the kids and with CY. So a big thank you to those who spoke in my absence. So to Merlet and Adam and to Lee. I appreciate being able to pass things on to others along the way. Now, as some of you may know, September 6th is when we're going to be meeting in person. And so we'll be meeting right here where I am. So I came this morning as pure practice to get up, get dressed. I have a dress on, I have like the earrings, everything. So that I'm like, you have to start like leaving your house. So I will be meeting on September 6th right here. Facilities, hopefully this week we'll be putting up a few instructions to the staff so that we can start passing that on to you so that you understand that it's going to be safe and that you can be comfortable as you come in and that you can be prepared. One thing to note is if you do come into the church, Oni is here on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and I'm here generally Tuesday and Thursdays for part of the day. So if you do come in, we just ask that you do wear a mask. It's just easier if you come prepared, so we don't feel like little ogres telling you, go get a mask on. We do have some here if you forget as well. So those are my quick introductions. Now, as I said, we've been on break, and so we've had a couple interesting moments. And I'm going to share my screen so you can follow along. So as I said, we've been on break, so we've had I've had extra time, and this whole COVID experience, I've had extra time to reintroduce myself to my children who are in our care full time and aren't going to different programs. And so we're in this interesting phase with our 2-year-old. So he asks all of the questions all of the time about everything. But his favorite question is this: why not? So we say, don't touch, and his response is, why not? Don't put it in your mouth. Why not? Don't take that toy from your brother. And he says, why not? But what's interesting is that sometimes he asks the question, why not, when it doesn't quite fit, when it doesn't make much sense. So I'll say, let's try the swings. And he'll say, why not? Drink some water. Why not? And so the question just doesn't always fit. Now, sometimes we find ourselves asking the wrong question, even though we're quite far from toddlerhood. We ask the question, what is best? What do I want? What makes me happy? And now at a glance, these are great questions. They're important questions. They're worthy questions, but they seem to lack depth when they're not accompanied with the right question. What is wise? And so I want you to just take a moment, and I want you to think back over your life and think to those moments when you neglected that question, what is wise? And perhaps it's the time that you didn't stay the extra day to visit a friend and really take in that moment of rest. Perhaps it's the time you overreacted at the salesperson, at their tone or their mannerism. Maybe it's the opportunity you said yes to something, or the time that you said no. Now, each of us have a series of stories, and each of us have a series of times when wisdom was neglected. And instead we made our choices based on a myriad of other things. We make our choices based on fear, ambition, desire, selfishness, pride, sorrow, and often simply because it's our best guess. The list of our motivations and decision-making matrices goes on and on. Yet a close read of scripture, which gives us a close read of Jesus, doesn't beckon us to be motivated by fear. It doesn't call us to move out of ambition, desire, or selfishness. It doesn't call us to be ruled by pride or sorrow, or even what we might imagine is best. Instead, page after page and character after character Jesus himself calls us and pulls us and beckons us to navigate the hard moments, the easy ones, and everything in between with wisdom as our guide. And so perhaps the better question is, what is wise? In today's passage, that question is framed in a passage of scripture that many of us know well. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Don't depend on your own understanding. Seek his will in all you do, and he will show you which path to take. And it's easy to take this piece of scripture and let its familiarity keep us from missing its significance. That a move towards what is wise is deeply rooted in who we trust, what we depend on, whose approval we seek, and what determines the choices we make. So as I was getting ready for this Sunday, the accompanying passage that came to mind was Matthew chapter 4. That passage is often titled The Temptation of Jesus. And in this passage, we encounter Jesus after he has not eaten for 40 days and 40 nights. He's retreated into the wilderness to pray, to fast, and to prepare for what lies ahead. And so it would be perfectly logical that Jesus's greatest desire in that moment would be food, that the need for sustenance and strength would consume him. And it's here that a secondary character shows up, Satan, the accuser. So he arrives in his brilliance and his splendor, and he says, if you are the Son of God, tell these stones to become bread. Now, if Jesus were to follow his desire or even common sense, then he ought to say yes. Not only can he prove his legitimacy in the face of his enemy, but he can also just say yes because he's hungry. But Jesus is not in the habit of embracing simply what is best, what seems most logical, when what is wise is so often much more significant. And so his response, we do not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of God. This passage, this statement he makes is a reference to Israel's history when their hunger was stopped by God's intervention of manna. And as manna or bread came from heaven, this was a clear reminder. It was a reminder then, and it's a reminder now, that God was their provider. God was their sustainer. He was the one that they should rely on. And so it was not the food that kept them. It was not the bread from heaven that sustained them, but it was God himself who was their portion. This is a message for even today. This is a message for now, that as we look around at a church, the people of God who are called to be Christ among the nations have been so quickly reminded that it is not the temporal things, that which we can touch and see and feel, that is our foundation or our security. Instead, it is the invisible God that so radically manifests himself when there is no bread to eat, when the familiar is missing, when the normal escapes us. It is there that wisdom calls us to let go of our faith in that which we can see and calls us to trust in the Lord with all our heart and lean not on our own understanding. In verse 5, Satan continues, and he takes Jesus to the highest point of the temple, and he says, if you are the Son of God, jump off. For the scripture says he will order the angels to protect you, and they will hold you with their hands so you won't even hurt your foot on a stone. This is an invitation for Jesus to demonstrate his self-sufficiency and his power. Once again, the obvious response is to give in, demonstrate his power in a glorious daredevil mic drop move and declare himself the winner. But this is not a moment about self-promotion, and Jesus responds, you must not test God. Moments later, Jesus is taken to a high mountain where he is showed all the kingdoms of the world and their glory. And Satan responds, I will give it all to you if you will simply kneel and bow down to me. And Jesus responds, you must not worship the Lord. You must worship the Lord your God and serve him only. Now, in both instances, Jesus is given the opportunity to receive what many of us seek out all of our lives: power and wealth. And while quick access to either seems like a worthy goal, with the opportunity to do so much good as a result of this pursuit, or at least that's what we tell ourselves, Jesus does not respond with the obvious or what would seem to be the easy decision. Instead, he defers to a God mindset. And he declares that his present and his future, his success and his progress, are not to be determined outside of his dependence on and seeking the approval of God above any other. And it is here that we hear wisdom beckon us to seek his will in all we do, believing that we will be shown and guided along the right path to take. And what is so beautifully wrapped up in this is that even when we find ourselves on the proverbial wrong path, a simple fallback to wisdom, a simple dive into trust so easily gives us the clarity and discernment needed to make our paths straight. Now, the temptations that Jesus faced are the very temptations that we face on a daily basis. The very moments in life that require us to move away from simply asking what will make me happy or what is best, and require us to accompany such notions with what is wise. It is not difficult for us to find ourselves face to face with the temptation to feed our immediate desires, rather than to lean into the process of discernment, or to succumb to the temptation to demonstrate our power and position for our own glorification and promotion, or to lean into the temptation that the pursuit of gaining more will solve our deepest needs and quench our deepest longings. That somehow everything about who we are is tied to what we have rather than who we belong to. It's so easy to look at our present and our future and to imagine that the answers required are simply connected to what we can do in our power and in our strength, and what we gain on our own, and where we can go with as little help as possible. These common moments require us to ask, what is wise? If we were to navigate the path life takes us on with a God mindset, rather than a reliance on our best guess or our own narrow knowledge. And so as we enter this week, may we simply begin to ask ourselves this question on a regular basis: what is wise? When it comes to decision making, wisdom beckons us not to be impressed with our own wisdom, but to instead fear God. When it comes to our resources and our money, wisdom beckons us to honor the Lord with our wealth and the best part of everything that we produce. When it comes to discernment, wisdom beckons us to find her more profitable than silver and gold and more precious than rubies. When it comes to uncertainty, wisdom beckons us to move from fear, but to be refreshed by common sense and discernment and the knowledge that God is our security. When it comes to how to best tackle the world's upheaval and injustice, wisdom beckons us not to withhold good from those around us. When it comes to how we ought to live with difficult people in difficult moments, wisdom beckons us to move away from mockery and to lean into humility. And so as we enter this week, and we're going to prepare to take communion, we're going to take a moment and lean into community. And we're going to dialogue a little bit on this notion of asking good questions that are always accompanied by the right question: what is wise? And so this morning, I've put out a few questions that we can chat about. And you can also diverge into other topics that kind of connect as well. So how can I, or how am I, relying on God, it should say more than self, sorry. Relying on God more than self, day by day. And then, has the pandemic helped or hindered your reliance on God? How do you seek out wisdom and discernment in your decision making? And then I'd love for you to be able to spend a few moments in prayer with one another and for one another as we enter this week with the question, what is wise?